Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I've got a video for you called I Wonder. The gameplay that you're about to see is me playing with T-Mac and Descend, two of the guys from our sort of pro team, the Tryhard Tube Socks. I'm going to put my Tryhard panties on and get a swarm here. This was actually my first game of the night. I played aggressively and then more cautiously and did end up getting a swarm and dogs and all that good stuff. Then the next game you're going to see is me kill whoring a lot less and playing very PTFO and almost getting a 200-0 shutout domination on Studio. So, I wonder, why have we not been able to master or even significantly improve AI in the last couple of decades? This has been kind of like the holy grail of computing and scientific research, something that millions, if not billions, or maybe potentially if we go globally, trillions of dollars in man-hours, and lots of people have been wondering about, but it doesn't seem to have been improved very much. I mean, there are good AIs for some things. You can train bots to kill me because they have auto-aim, or they can think a little bit, and chess moves can flank. Chess isn't yet a solved game. But a machine that can do all of these things, that can truly think like a human, that can process abstract data, or more importantly, create new information, if that's something that human beings are even capable of doing, hasn't been created yet, or even really improved on significantly. And I wonder why. Is it a problem of not having enough computing power, or are our computers simply too weak? Because as it was described by some scientists, the computers we have now are essentially like lobotomized cockroaches. They're input-output devices. They only do some things. Or perhaps it's not enough programming time. Perhaps we don't have the programmers that put in the time and effort to build the program that's good enough. Maybe that genius hasn't been born yet that has it figured out and knows exactly what to do. I'm not entirely sure. Or is it something more profound than that, something more insightful? I wonder if it's because we don't understand how our own intelligence works. If you think about it, the way the human brain works has not actually been mastered. Matter of fact, it hasn't been broken into that deeply. I was going to say it hasn't scratched the surface, but that would be unfair to you neuroscientists out there. You've definitely gone deeper than the surface of how the brain works, but you have not yet plumbed the depths of knowledge. We don't understand how our own intelligence works. We don't understand entirely how it evolved, how it emerged, why it's here. Now, if you go with creationism and that sort of thing, that's okay. But even still, we don't understand what separates our conscious mind and our subconsciousness, or more importantly, not many people have been able to accurately answer the question, is our consciousness even real? And a lot of the answers that you'll get from neuroscientists or molecular biologists, that sort of thing, the people that study the brain on a chemical or a very small level, they'll say that consciousness isn't a real thing. A consciousness, if you were a car, if your whole body were the car, the subconscious would be the engine and the consciousness would be the speedometer. It only shows you what the engine's doing, and the subconscious, the engine, is doing all the work and doing all the driving and making all the decisions, and you're only able to observe it. And we can't even test for consciousness to prove that it's real. And I'll give you the example of the Chinese room. So, to get a consciousness test, you would look for something that has self-awareness. On top of this self-awareness, you're looking for a capacity to understand and learn. And I'll use the Chinese room example again. Let's imagine there's a man that's put in a room. He's locked in there. He's got all the food, water, bathroom essentials, but he's stuck in this room. And in this room, there is a giant tome, a massive book, a compendium of knowledge, of understanding of the Chinese language, but only in Chinese. So if he were to, say, receive some written instructions in Chinese, he could refer to the book and see how to respond appropriately to that set of instructions in Chinese, while himself not understanding what's going on at all. Now imagine on the outside of this room there's a really smoking hot Chinese girl, kind of like my wife, and she's passing messages under the door, and he opens them up and he sees the Chinese characters and he doesn't know what to do, but he looks at his giant Chinese book and matches the characters, and there's a response on the other side, and he slips it under, and he just keeps this up, letter, reply, letter, reply, the whole time not understanding Chinese, just matching symbols, inputs and outputs, not knowing what's going on at all. But he's writing love letters to this girl, and this girl is falling for him. She absolutely adores him, but one day she finally kicks in the door, breaks in there to set her, future husband free, only to find out it's some random white guy that doesn't speak Chinese at all. Matter of fact, didn't even know it was a girl on the other side, or that they were love letters or dirty letters or anything about them, and they're completely incompatible. Now, while the person was intelligent, he was unable to prove his intelligence in any way to the other person due to a lack of communication, and this is analogous to a computer. Now, we could assume that the computer is not intelligent like a person because it's a simple input-output device, but is a person any more than an input-output device? Because the computer is doing a similar kind of thing. It's just taking, you give it some kind of language, some kind of input, and it already knows, and then it gives you some kind of output. Based on that, could we say it's intelligent or not? Now, the clearly not intelligent computer could pass a test like this because we've designed it to, yet it knows nothing. And this is kind of a problem. We don't understand how consciousness works, and therefore we don't know how intelligence works and how these things emerge and evolve, and we don't understand it. Maybe it goes all the way down to the atomic level. Maybe there's some quantum tunneling or pairing in our brain or entanglement that we don't understand at all. And that goes back to the computing power argument. What if the reason we can't recreate our own conscious set of emotions and intelligence is because we don't have a computer that's powerful enough to simulate all of the atomic interactions in our brain at a cellular level? What if we can't do that? Obviously, we can't do that. That would, all the computers in the world probably couldn't do that. You could do a rough approximation, but if we had a computer running a simulation of each atom and each electron, that would just bog everything down. And if you think about it, the way computers work these days, they actually just bounce electrons around. If you get quantum computers, you're just quantumly entangling electrons. So you have electrons simulating other electrons in the least efficient way possible, and it's just crazy to think about these things. And we might not ever be able to do this. We might not ever be able to build a computer powerful enough to do this. And I know computers have been getting more powerful over time, and they might always will be. We're going to talk about Moore's Law now. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Moore's Law, it says that computing power essentially doubles every 2 years, or maybe every year. I forget. It's a doubling factor. And most people quit out of this game after the swarm, but some more will join back in a minute. And the time frame isn't important. The important thing about Moore's Law is that it estimates that computer processing power, will constantly grow at a certain rate of growth, and it's honestly stuck to that pretty well over the last couple of years. But eventually there is a really hard physical limit on computing power, I think. It's kind of like batteries, if you think about it, why battery technology hasn't evolved or emerged or got too much better than it has in the last, 100 years, is because there is a really hard physical and chemical limit to how much energy you can store in a small space using our chemical electrode kind of things. Now, if you up to a nuclear battery or something, that's totally different. But our basic lithium ion positive negative battery, where you just move charges across some sort of barrier, there is a hard physical limit to that. You can only put the most amount of a certain element combination in a small enough package, and there's a limit to that. And I wonder if there's a limit to that with computers. Even with quantum computing, how much computing can we possibly get down to such a tiny small level, even on the atomic scale? Even let's say if we scale a modern supercomputer down to something like the size of an iPhone, or maybe even smaller than that. Let's say we shrink today's supercomputer down to the size of an atom. Well, there's still finite atoms in the universe, and while there's an astronomically large number of them and we could build one hell of a computer, it's still not infinite. At some point, it will stop growing. And this leads me to the law of economics. And economics, the definition of economics is the study of decision-making given limited resources. So if you only have so many of some things, you can only do one thing and not another, and there's trade-offs and benefits and downsides to each. What will the person choose to do? Now, economics always eventually turns into money and macro and microeconomics and, inflation and this kind of stuff. But there's a whole different branch of economics that just studies decision-making. But we're going to talk about the money part. The money part, the global economy, the macroeconomics, all of the current models, and every last one of them that I've ever heard of, unless there's some crazy one in existence that I've missed out on, they're all based on growth. This game right here, you're going to see me try to go for the 200 and 0, but I don't believe that I'm going to get it. They're all based on the economy constantly growing. They're based on constant expansion. They're based on improvement, either expanding into new territories, new lands, or, a matter of fact, just production itself becoming more efficient over time. And that's really good because it's been working for the last 100 to 200 years or so. Now, that doesn't mean every single day things get better. It goes up and down. It fluctuates. We'll have a bad decade of war, like, World War II or something like that. But in general, the trend has been constantly positive. And this is something that scares me, that the science of limited resources and most of our economic decision-making is built on policies of unlimited improvement. And while I believe that our world and our technology can improve a whole lot in the coming future, there is a finite amount of this. And I asked, I believe I had this conversation with my roommate, and he humored me all the way, and I had a similar conversation with my professor that didn't take it quite as far because he could kind of see where the trolling was going. And I asked, okay, so what happens when we run out of things on Earth. Like, what happens if we run out of raw resources, out of fuels, out of manpower, whatever? And I was like, well, then technology will get more efficient. And I'm like, okay, well, what if it doesn't get efficient enough to keep up with the population? Or what if, like batteries and computers and these sort of things, there's a finite hardcore limit on this? And he's like, okay, we'll go to space. Okay, well, space has its own technological problems. Like, you got to deal with time dilation and things like this, which really screw up the expansion over time sort of mechanics of economics, and that it might not even be possible. Like, there might not be a way to break that faster than light limit to get all the resources we need. But he's like, don't worry, don't worry. You know, I've been around forever. The technology will improve. We'll be able to do it. And I'm like, okay, well, what happens when we take up the whole galaxy? We'll get another galaxy. What happens when we get all the galaxies? Like, well, then we'll get more efficient. And then I say, okay, well then what happens when we get all of the economic power in the world running off an atom or a couple of atoms? How do you beat that? And he's like, no, don't worry, we'll take care of it. I'm like, this isn't science. This is you just saying, don't worry, and it'll be okay. And this is something that worries me. I would love to see an economic model based on decline, like the economics of not a crash, but an actual decline, like the economics of infinitely declining resources, or let's say per capita declining resources, because I think that's a place we're heading, not in my lifetime, maybe not in the lifetime of, God, thousands of you, but it'll be there eventually. And I don't think it can be possible, but that leads me to the last thing I want to talk about today. Who defines our possibility? Like, we say this is possible and this isn't possible. If you think about it, the word possible means can be done. In the world, impossible means something that cannot be done, no matter what you do, no matter what you try, no matter whatever. And you know, people use the word impossible and they toss it around for challenges, or they mix up impossible and improbable. But the things that are truly impossible, like being two places at once, traveling in time, having it be round and square at the same time, unstoppable force and immovable object bumping into each other, who sets up these rules? Who defines this? Who says that we can't do it? And I think a lot of that is kind of established by our 3D perception of the world. We see our world in 3 dimensions: left, right, up, down, forward, backward. Well, that's more, you know, XYZ coordinates. We call them different things when we speak about them. But the reality is, our universe, our world, is actually made of more than just 3 dimensions. It's at least 4 or 5. It could go up to 11, 12, 13. And the popular thing these days, which I'm not entirely sure which film or movie popularized it, or even the book like Slaughterhouse-Five actually popularized it a little bit, is to treat time as the 4th dimension. And if my understanding is correct, time is not the 4th dimension. It's its own different physical, and it's actually not a constant because we can't measure it properly, but it's a physical property of the universe, whereas the extra dimensions are literally extra dimensions we can't see. Think about, I'll use the example of flatlanders. Imagine like a paramecium, like a little worm, something that's so tiny and so small and so flat and has its vision limited. It lives on a flat world, like a piece of paper. Its whole world is left and right. There is no up and down. These sort of concepts don't exist to that. And if you were to reach down and grab that paramecium, or that tiny, living being, and pick it up and pull it up into your world, which is something it didn't even know it existed, imagine what that would do to its perception. If we moved through its piece of paper, its world, it wouldn't see me, it wouldn't see my hand, it wouldn't see my face. It would see infinitely and constantly changing tiny slices of me as I penetrate that planar barrier. And the same thing can be said of us. We live in 3 dimensions. Well, what would happen if somebody came in, something, or maybe another person that's got wizard powers or something, comes in from the 4th dimension and moves through our world, because it won't ever constantly be in it, being a higher dimensional being. It'll be in all the dimensions at once. It would look something like a crazy worm or a blur. Or if they were to reach down and grab us and yank us through the 4th dimension, much less the 4th or 5th, our vision couldn't handle it. They would just blur and smear the world together into a cacophony of colors that we don't understand and wouldn't even be able to know what was happening. But imagine a human being born with extra perception abilities. Now, this isn't psychic powers. This is something different. The ability to perceive the 4th dimension in a way that we cannot. The best we can do right now is map it and make little games we can 3D project a 4D object or a 5D, and it gets infinitely more complicated. But what if somebody could actually see that and do all of these things? How could they move, the places they could go? Could they go backwards and forwards in time? Maybe. But they could take steps in what I would call strange directions. Instead of moving left, right, up, down, these sort of places, they could move different or move strange. They actually use like kappa, gamma, delta to change these directions. But they could step between what we would call universes and do things that we couldn't ever possibly do, just with one extra dimension, and understand things that we couldn't hope to understand. And that's with 4 dimensions. Imagine 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to 11, 12, or 13 possible mathematically theoretical dimensions that we live in. That would smash all the things that we think are impossible into oblivion. It would blow minds. It would change worlds and religions. And I just stunned myself like a moron there. But imagine what that human could accomplish. And I think it would be something amazing. It's something that amazes me, that I sit here and I think about it. And what amazes me the most is that this concept of extra dimensionality and how we move and how we see our world is so strange, so new, and so foreign to most people and most minds that we do not have the vocabulary to describe this. I'm sure you've heard me use other words and make up and go through a lot of explanations here. It's because even our language, the way that we think, is built in a 3D environment. At best, some people can't even think for that much. But mathematicians had to build mathematical models and assign very specific names to these things in order to make sure that they could actually be understood and that they didn't confuse them, because they didn't have a way to communicate the ideas to each other without the math. And that's where we're at this point in the commentary. I hope you learned something. This is why I can't sleep at night. A lot of you wonder what it is I think about, what I wonder about in my spare time, and this is what I do. I sit here and wonder about these things. I probably daydream way more than I ever should. I mean, if I were doing something good for the world, I would be researching these topics instead of just sitting here and trolling through all the articles down at the bottom of Wikipedia to see what was going on. But that's me. That's why I can't sleep. That's why I can't think. And these are some things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to get off my chest. And hopefully I didn't confuse too many of you. Hopefully I didn't scare too many of you away. And I hope you enjoyed the commentary, and I hope you learned something useful. If there's anything you didn't understand, I highly recommend just Googling it. Wikipedia is a great place to start for a simple, like, base level understanding. Check out the articles linked at the bottom if they're public for anything higher, or maybe like a technical journal or something. That's all for the commentary. If you liked it, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.